You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today my guest is Gloria Johnson-Cusack, who is a longtime friend and leader in the nonprofit sector. Although you'll find out today, her career has gone through government, business, as well as the nonprofit sector. In the nonprofit world, she was once head of the Leadership 18, which is a group of the largest 18 nonprofit organizations in the country. She was also in the government, a special assistant to the president in the White House Office of Public Service or Community Service. She worked also as a liaison to Congress for the Peace Corps. In business, she's managed her own firm that helps nonprofits and worked in corporate America for a minute. So I am just pleased to have my friend Gloria Johnson-Cusack here to talk about a whole variety of things, nonprofit, and I know you're going to get a lot out of this interview. Gloria, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
It's so wonderful to be with you again, our friend and colleague. Here we are after 15 years or so, still learning and trying to share our knowledge with others.
You know, recently, Gloria, I posted on Instagram some photos of me in my days at OIC. And whenever I think of OIC, Opportunities Industrial Division, I think of when I was the chair of the board and you graciously agreed to join me on that board and you offered us so much. And I could never really thank you for what you did for that. But it also showed me the breadth of what your knowledge base is and your experience and how you can contribute in so many important ways to organizational success. But I want to start out just by talking about you and how you sort of got involved in service-oriented work. What led you to this path that you've been going on now for so many years?
Well, that the way you frame that question is tough for me because I don't like just talking about me. I'm going to try to tell it in a way that I think is relevant to the folks that are going to be listening. And I think what translates about my story and what drove me to public service is just heart and lived experience that helped me see that there were lots of ways that people with good intentions can be better at helping people not just survive but thrive. And in my own personal life, I've had experiences from one extreme to the other. And so my commitment, I think at a very young age, was, to take the experience that I had coming from a working class neighborhood that was once on food stamps and, within my family because of family hardships, to going to the most elite prep schools and universities in the world. And I think at about 15, I decided, okay, I want to take as much intention as I can to build bridges and to help other people of goodwill do more for more people.
Yeah. Well, that story is not unusual in America, how people who themselves were helped by philanthropy because of their own circumstances end up giving back themselves as well. When I talk to anyway, and you may be the same, when I talk to young people, especially first-time college goers, or people who are first-generation college goers, what I generally hear when I ask them, what do you want to do when you grow up? They say, I want to be a teacher. I hear that so much, and I want to tell them, well, I want to tell them, why don't you go make some money? And then if you don't like making money, come back and be a teacher. You know. But I think that is the chosen path for so many people because they were helped by teachers. Teachers were the ones that actually gave them the opportunities to grow and learn and to get to a place where they can experience their best lives. How about you? Were there people in your life who sort of directed you or showed you examples of what you could be?
Absolutely. I'll start with where you went, about the teachers.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a coincidence that you and I have both found each other again being teachers at Columbia University's graduate school.
Absolutely.
To support people who are leading mission-based organizations because we were influenced in our formative years by folks who took their lived and professional experiences and sort of put their arms around us, heart and mind, not just to teach us the substantive stuff, but to be models and people who can say, I see you. I see what your potential is. And then to experience that in my own life, to flourish. So every stage of my life, teachers have been important. They were often the ones who helped me find those philanthropic dollars. Like I went to a fancy prep school, Columbia University, with full top tuition and financial aid, and even that wasn't enough. So it was always those private philanthropists, often teachers, who were the ones that helped me connect with the community, sororities or fraternities or church groups and the like. So I would say that. Then the thing that you and I know we have in common, the faith-based community, was really everything. It was a place where I experienced socioeconomic diversity without knowing that's what it was, where I got a sense of belonging, so that now whether I'm in corporate boards or board chair of a foundation, like I am in Silicon Valley, or working with community organizing or advising the biggest corporations in the world now, in my consulting work, I am the same person everywhere because my years being loved and affirmed in the faith-based community helped me know that I'm good just the way I am. And I keep learning, but at the heart, I know that I'm okay. And that when I'm in a room, I'm showing up with the expectation that I am offering and contributing value that might not otherwise be represented if I were not in the room.
Yeah. Well, I can't help but ask you, and this isn't a political show for sure, but seeing Kamala Harris be nominated as the first African-American woman or woman of color to be the Democratic nominee for president, how does that make you feel being a woman of color yourself?
Yes, well, my response might be unusual. It's not surprising to me that at a time when there is so much disruption and a need for leadership, that it would be a Black woman who would step up. And the language of the campaign has very interestingly been that selective. And I think that we come from a tradition as women of color, and especially as African-American women, we come from a tradition of stepping up when there is a need, even when there are others who would wish to discount us or for whom we know there's no benefit of the doubt given at all. But yet we say, I can show you better than I can tell you. So she just represents generations of women that I've seen do the same thing in my own personal life and what I've studied about history and every epoch that matters, in modern culture.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to young women today who are about to step out into their careers?
I would say the most important two things, and it's an easy answer based on what you've heard me say already. I think the first and most important is to be very clear in your own mind about what your own intentions are for showing up, whether it's in the workplace or in the community. And in our sector, often there's not a huge division. And I think that intention is important because there will be lots of opportunities if we are talented and if we have stewarded our gifts and learned, there'll be lots of opportunities for us to share those gifts in ways that are not aligned with our own sense of purpose and what we think we were created to do, what brings us the most joy. So I often encourage people of all persuasions, of all identities, and so it holds for the answer that you've invited, to just be clear about what your source of joy is. If you have noticed all your life that you get excited when you work in a creative environment, or you get excited when you're problem solving, or you get excited when you are writing, listen to that experience, that thing that feels natural, and then see if there are ways that you can channel that in your career pursuits, and not necessarily believe that you already have to have a vision of how it's going to be utilized, that I'm going to be a teacher. Well, maybe you will be a teacher, but maybe that will be one of 7 different things that you'll do, God willing, in your lifetime. So being very clear about intention is the first. And then the second one is just work at mastering your craft. There is no substitute for putting in the work and doing it with diligence. I often say, because in many of the leadership roles I've played, especially in the private sector, I find that I might be the only person of color, or the only person under a certain age, or the only person of my gender. And the takeaway for me is that there may be people in the room who have experiences and expertise that is already identified and valued by our coworkers or by the team. I have found that it's important for me to feel the joy of doing the work if I've put in lots of work ahead of time. So I may not be the smartest person in the room, don't want to be. I want to be around people who are smarter than me so that iron can sharpen iron. But I also want to come in with a sense of confidence that I've done the work that will allow me to add value no matter what the particular dynamics might be in that workplace.
Well, Gloria, you've been very courageous. I probably had maybe 2 or 3 real jobs in my life over these last 45 years been working, if you can believe that. And you have had many. And I wanted to just ask you, when you think about all of the experiences that you've had in government, in business, in the nonprofit sector, what would sum up the totality, I guess, of the learnings? What is your major takeaway from these various experiences? And how does that really help you shape the way you advise executives today?
Mm-hmm. I would say that the reason I love where I am working now, I'm a senior consultant to a firm called Canvas Leadership that advises executives and leaders in the private sector mostly, but also in the philanthropic sector. We've worked with the Ford Foundation, Kellogg, and others. I have found that I'm loving this job because it is really the approach that encaptures the things that I have found to be most important. Meaning, motivation, and momentum. Deciding that what is meaningful to me and the way that I want to use my gifts and skills equips me to have the kind of mindset and behavior that's going to help me stay focused and to be diligent when, not if, things get funky, get challenging, in leadership roles. Motivation is not just about like an attitude or an emotion. To me, I've learned through the years that I can stay motivated when I feel I have the skills and the tools to help to be able to adapt to whatever comes up. So for me, it's about being a constant learner. The motivation comes, it's made real when I'm a constant learner and know that I'm always developing tools that in some way, even if I don't know how immediately, will translate to whatever the need is, the thing that I've got to step up to. And then the momentum, the big lesson that I've got is I can keep momentum if I surround myself with people formally or informally in a community, people who share my values and will make sure that I'm happy, like that I'm joyful. Happy is kind of like a weird temporal thing. But surrounding myself with people, I mean, you and I keep finding each other, after 15, 20 years? It's like, what are you doing in this room again? I thought we were doing X, Y, and Z. Because we, I think, are attracting and attracted to people who find joy in serving others. And I think that's the magic formula: meaning, motivation, and momentum.
What is that joy? Where does it come from?
Oh,
We're giving things away. We're not like getting anything from it. Usually, or maybe we are getting something from it. Actually, we are. But I wanted to hear you describe it.
We might know each other too much that you know exactly what I'm going to say. I mean, the joy just comes from my faith.
Yeah.
The joy comes from knowing that, it's tried and true. It's not just like a leap of faith. It's faith born out of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I have been in circumstances literally all of my life where, yes, I've been tremendously blessed with many more gifts and opportunities than most people of any, profile would wish to have. But I've also had my share of rough spots. And I know from my faith tradition that if I just yield myself to a higher power and ask humbly to be guided with discernment, then that's a big part of my job, and then to release it. So I pray every morning. I ask God to give me discernment and wisdom and courage, and then I get up and go do my best. And that seems to be the thing that helps, because I think the more negative way of saying it is I have had experiences, learned the hard way, where I relied more on my own sense of ability, my own talent, my skills, my education, and have found that doesn't do the job. The joy comes from being yielded and then finding myself in a community of people, and literally the energy. I attract a certain kind of person intimately, who is motivated by that same kind of thing. And that also helps me repel folks who may be excellent, maybe even operating in the mission-based environment, but whose hearts aren't leading the work. And having that level of discernment is something, I'm 58 now, I think I understand that a bit better than I might have even 10 years ago.
Well, you mentioned faith. Last week, my guest was Amir Pasek, who is the Eugene R. Temple Dean at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And
love that institution.
Yeah, it's a great place for us in this sector. It's just a wonderful place. But Amir talked about faith as well. And he talked about it relative to academia and how they set out to prove things, but it generally starts with faith. And, we don't know, even when we start nonprofits, whether they're going to succeed. We believe somehow that this is the right thing to do, and we should be the ones to do it. But there's no resources, there's no money, there's nothing. We go out and get all that, right? And I just wonder, from your perspective, Gloria, how we link this faith, right, that we have to this need also to measure and to understand empirically, right, how we're doing so that we can actually accomplish the objectives that our faith sends us on a mission to achieve.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And of course, I think about it a lot. I'm a nerd, I'm an introspective, I'm a student, so, and yet I would swear you were spying on my senior team meeting that I had earlier this morning with my team. Because
maybe I was.
what we were talking about is how we can help corporate leaders, like leaders at PepsiCo and Heineken and the NBA and other foundations that I mentioned before, to acknowledge that there must be metrics, but there also have to be indicators of progress that go more to not measuring outputs or even business outcomes, but that measure more the mindset, the way people think and behave. Are we exhibiting behaviors that align, in this case, with our values about doing work that's bigger than ourselves or our own personal ambition? Are we showing up in a way when working with teams, which is the only way to get any sustainable change done? Are we exhibiting behaviors and mindsets that bring people in? I never want to be the person with the strongest voice or who believes they have the best idea coming in. I want to be the person, and I think this is the intent of people of faith, who realize that, well, there's that of God, there's value in every person who's in this room. So as my role as a leader is to find ways to pull people into the conversation, to be disruptive, to question assumptions that are made about how we can solve the problems of the organization or the community. And for me, that's about thinking about metrics much more broadly, not just about what is quantitative, but what is qualitative. And we can measure ways that people behave. That's the thing that we do at our firm. We literally have people come in and code behaviors. We have 52 of them, 52 behaviors it's a proprietary thing. We sit and put people in a business situation and code the way that people are showing up, each individual. And by the next day, we present a dashboard that helps each individual, they're usually executives and managers, see, like, how much do you talk when you're in a team problem-solving setting? How many open-ended questions do you ask that bring people in? Are you good at finding a way to say, well, what am I missing? Like, all of that stuff, that's real data that can be used, but it's more not about the outcomes, but helping people understand how you show up affects the outcomes. So our passion, my passion, increasingly now, at this stage in my life, where literally I've worked in every single sector of society, higher ed and the like, my passion now is in finding ways to help super smart, talented people know where their gaps are and to be more comfortable inviting people in so that those gaps can get addressed, because that's where all of the trends are showing us change and innovation is going to happen. With AI, changing demographics, the global marketplace, what we need are leaders who can have a mindset that makes us comfortable with change. And we're not wired for that. Like, one of the founders of the firm that I work with now is a neuroscientist. So we try to sort of close the gap between neuroscience and art. We know that we are wired to resist change. Like most humans, even when it's in their best interest, if they understand it intellectually, when they are presented with information or circumstances that make them question their own assumptions or their own beliefs, they physically experience the same kind of threat that they do as though their life is in jeopardy. Like, that's how we're hardwired. So people, to this point about having meaning, we have to decide, I have to decide, I have my own personal reason for wanting to think and be differently, to change. And no one can make that true for us. So I am super passionate now that I understand so much about the neuroscience, and I've seen how people in 2 days can change the way that they decide they want to show up around people because they see data about their own selves. I've seen that people can change. So what I'm almost like, an ambassador for doing what I can to help our sector and people to do what people are doing in the business sector increasingly, which is investing in human behavior and helping people be more self-aware so that we can be more innovative. That's the bottom line.
Well, that's really critical in this environment where every day it seems that we're having to start over because what we were doing doesn't work anymore, or it's not going to be working in the long run.
Right.
And
just because it got us there doesn't mean it's what's going to keep us.
It's not going to keep us
or
going.
help us accelerate. It's just not that kind of party anymore.
Right. So when you talk to these folk and you give them the report, so to speak, mm-hmm. How do they respond? I mean, because we've all been in meetings when the same person does all the talking and everybody in the room is looking at them like, why doesn't that person just be quiet and give somebody else a chance to talk? Uh-huh. And they're just doing their thing. They don't even realize in many cases that they're crowding out other input and ideas that can be really meaningful to the project that they're working on. Mm-hmm. So how is it that you make them aware such that they see the need to change and actually do it? And what is their response when they see it?
Yeah. Well, of course, the responses are as varied as the individuals. Sometimes we can have 10 people in the room. Last week I was in California. We had 200 in the room.
Wow.
And then we sort of break everybody out. But there are pretty much two responses that are typical. And there are certain ways that we try to help folks through it, because it's usually never longer than having more than 2 days of having everyone all together, for a concentrated amount of time. The first is humble. Every single person is humbled by the data, because it's not what the data that we present to people is not about what other people say about you, or we as professional facilitators and coaches and consultants say about what we observe. The data is showing you how you are in a room. And these are people who are data driven. That's how they got to be leaders. So they're humble because they can't fuss with what they see. Right? So that's the one reaction. And then the second reaction by the time we leave is to be hopeful, because we try to facilitate conversations and real-time planning for people to reflect and to, in a comfortable space, usually with people that they have not worked with before, which is part of the magic of how it gets curated. So there's no weird power dynamic where they're afraid to deal with that humbling situation with their subordinates in the room. And it ends up being a counseling session where we facilitate giving our professional feedback based on our experience. And what's great is people, their peers, not their peers in their organization, but peers who have gone through the same experience can share their own advice.
Yeah.
And so there's the humility, sometimes the total freaked out response from people who are not used to focusing on their gaps because they're superstars. And then there's the optimism that, okay, at least now I know what are the things I need to focus on improving. And then we try to provide them the tools that'll help them continue with the momentum. So it's usually, I'm trying not to be overly Pollyannish about it, but the feedback that we get is, it's kind of empowering when you got information and you got people telling you, well, you can make adjustments and your team's going to benefit. And oh, by the way, your career will benefit and your organization is going to be more profitable. You just got to commit to the journey.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this way, though. So we know about the person who speaks all the time, but there are also these folk in the room who don't speak up at all for a whole variety of reasons. And that is also, I think, a malady that we have in group projects, right? When really smart people tend not to participate. And we see it in the classroom too, right? When you have these people who are really smart, but they don't speak up for a whole variety of reasons. How do you help them along?
The same way you and I do it at Columbia University, at the graduate school, right? We're the leaders in the room. Our job is not to impart all the knowledge we've got. Our job is to facilitate learning and to pull people in, right? So that they can share in the exploration. And it's the same in the workplace. The challenge is that our own professional ambitions and egos in the workplace are so heightened that it's sometimes difficult. And so most of the work that we do is about helping for people to notice how that unconstructive behavior that you just described, dominating a conversation, for instance, or not asking probing questions that can be helpful. The best contribution we can make is to help people see what it's like when folks do lean in. And it's about belonging with the big B. Like we think about belonging in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and folks have different understandings about it. In every scenario, belonging is optimized when there's room, literally, and space, airtime, for people to be able to lean in. And it is not a coincidence. The research shows, and Lord knows you and I know, being people of color in this country and in the world that we've occupied globally, that some people have to work harder to feel the safety to be their true selves. Yes. And to offer up. It's also true for introverts. my favorite people are introverts,
Yeah.
especially in leadership settings, because often their learning and leading style is to be reflective, and just because they're quiet doesn't mean they're not taking it all in. And if we make room for them, it's often the case that when they do open and share their ideas, they are the most beautifully formulated spaces for analysis and contribution that could happen, for the whole, duration of time that people are together. We also know for sure that in certain settings, women have to be safe, have to feel safe to be able to do that, although women often are the worst perpetrators of dominating conversations in some settings. And now what we're focusing much more on in the private sector, and I hope the philanthropic sector leans into this work too, is noticing how certain behaviors dealing with the remote and hybrid dynamics that most of us are operating in requires a completely different set of skills and self-awareness. So that's a long answer to, it's all in there, and the goal of good leaders, facilitators, consultants is to present people with data and a space for them to see themselves, not have to be persuaded, and then decide for themselves that they want to think and act differently.
All right, so now I want to put it in this context. You worked in nonprofits, as I have, all my life. You haven't all your life, but I have. Mm-hmm. And I've been in rooms, and I'm going to out my colleagues and me too, where we're all kind of like the grant seekers, we're on the receiving end of the check, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And when we're just together, the conversations are collegial and connected and so forth. But then when a funder enters the room, the whole energy changes. How do we deal with that?
Yeah. Well, as you know, for years I worked with the council and foundations, right, and with their boards and the CEOs of many of the member organizations. And I completely exploited the fact that I was a consultant to go straight to that issue and say, you are gatekeepers, you have disproportionate power in every room. Can I give you some tips about ways that you can show up to help not get in the way of progress? Mm-hmm. And they end up being lovely, fruitful conversations. And I'd say the two most important behaviors that I notice work well is when, even before folks get in the room, that the people from the philanthropic community co-create the agenda with the folks that are the grantees or the grant seekers, and build into the agenda a way for those philanthropic leaders not to lead, but to be listening. And sometimes the most constructive way to do that is to understand in the planning, what are the most important questions, not answers. What are the most important questions that the philanthropic leaders want to experience, the discourse, and then finding a way to curate the time so that, again, the people that are leading and contributing most to the conversation are not the philanthropic folks. And there's a certain art and science to that too, because it can be weird, like you're pretending like the elephant is not in the room, and that's a drag. So that before you get in the room, that's one thing. And then the other part is how we show up. And it goes to what we said before, having some level of confidence that our perspective matters. And yes, the philanthropic leaders have to create the space to help us believe that they actually want to hear truth unfettered, not us just sort of parroting back what we think the philanthropic leaders need to hear. But I think we as people in the nonprofit sector, if that's the hat we're wearing, should walk into the room with some belief that our perspective is informed because we're the ones that are on the ground. And oh, by the way, many of us as staff and leaders and even board members of the nonprofit organizations have lived experience that is just as valid as any data or analysis or research that could be, curated or funded by the philanthropic organization. So it means that we have to have some level of confidence and then I think the third thing is to be adept at being able to say things in a way that people can hear us. So, a book about finding different ways to frame conversations around DEI.
Yeah, I want to talk about
and
that book.
And that's a big part of it.
You mentioned the elephant, and I wanted to talk about.
Oh, I didn't mean to. That was not a plug for the book.
but I was getting ready to go there anyway. I wanted to hear about building the elephant, as you say, And so talk about the book and what its main themes are and what we're trying to achieve with it.
Yeah. So it's a small book on purpose with straightforward language. It's called Growing the Elephant. And the elephant in the room is the elephant of advantage. I wrote the book with a wonderful white male straight colleague while I was senior advisor to the president at Florida International University, which is where he was teaching as well. Of course, it's both of us working in leadership. And we thought it was important to try to find a way to frame what at the time were increasingly hot discussions around privilege. And our feeling experience, both with completely different backgrounds, he's solidly from the private sector, was that the way that the idea of privilege has been discussed and had been, especially in the aftermath of George Floyd and all that happened in its wake, was not constructive. That it put people so much on their heels, mostly people in power, therefore mostly men and white men, that it meant that we were spending a whole lot of time and energy trying to settle people down, and because their response is privilege. That makes me think that you think that I didn't work hard for what I got. So it's loaded. Mm-hmm. So we thought that it would be helpful to use a reframing, which is to say the elephant in the room is advantage. Everybody has some advantage more than others based on who they are and where they come from. We can all agree on that. So now can we agree that we want to show up in certain ways that help us grow advantage for all, so that then we're competing, because it doesn't take out competition, and whatever settings we're in, but we can compete with more people having more tools to do so. And so it's got very specific, practical examples about ways that people can do it. It aligns with some of the stuff I've talked about before. And I got to tell you, I've been told by many of my male colleagues, white male colleagues, that it was so helpful to them that they took the book and threw it across the room and it hit the wall, because they could see behaviors in themselves or attitudes in themselves that they found frustrating or were embarrassed about. So it moved them. And so my answer was to the two guys who said it completely separately. I was like, well, did you pick up the book and read it some more to figure out how to solve it? And the answer was yes. So one of those people ended up writing a lovely review, and it was actually endorsed by our dear friend Gail McGovern, who wrote testimonials there, and former CEO of Girl Scouts of America and other luminaries in business and leadership. And it actually got listed as among the top most important new books to read by Bloomberg News.
Wow.
Bloomberg News. I'm like, how is that possible? It's in 2023 at the winter. And I think it's because it's just meant to be straightforward, not to be a historical perspective or even a comprehensive discussion about the why, but it's the now what. It's the now what book for people who want to, in their own individual lives, show up differently.
Well, it's really
Growing
nice
the elephant.
Yeah, it's really nice to see somebody who knows something get attention for what they've written about. So let's start with that.
I was very shocked by it. If it helps people think that there's something of value in it, good.
Well, Gloria, look, I appreciate you doing this. This has been just what I anticipated, freewheeling, full of candor, lots of great experience and learning for people who care to learn. And I'm full, I feel really full, although I could probably go on another 2 hours.
And we have. Trying to solve the problem, but you started with it, joy.
Right.
We're looking for joy, and as always, this has been joyful.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you. And, keep doing the great work that you're doing. I can't wait to hear more about the success of this new enterprise that you're involved in. And I know that your clients are getting a lot of value, it seems to me, from this way of approaching getting together and building and innovating. So congratulations to you guys for coming up with this.
Thank you. They keep coming back, and it's almost all repeat, clients. So that's a good feeling. And I can't get off without thanking you for your leadership in so many things, including with BBB. And they're smart people to keep you, and it's also, you're modeling a lot of what we've been talking about, which is you're a continuous learner. And you're helping to share that learning in all its dimensions right now. So I think I still want to be like you when I grow up.
So much to learn, so little time.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say to anyone who's seeing this for the first time, this is the Heart of Giving podcast. It's a weekly show. This is actually episode 203, and we've done that many consecutive weeks of this show. You can find it on audio on all major podcast platforms. And this video version you found on YouTube. So I hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And if you want to support the show, you can do that by going to give.org, and you can make a gift there. And we would be so appreciative, and it will be used in amazing ways. So thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.